Nice green tie. Thank you for wearing green on Game 1 of the Celtics series.
Wait, I'm sorry. I think it's the Mavs series.
Well, we'll have to. I'm sure you'll be at least.
The truth is, I can't root for either of these teams.
Yeah, because what's the reason against? I know the reason against Boston because I've worked for you for 6 years. But
I cannot tolerate either Luka Doncic or Kyrie Irving.
Oh, okay.
So
I mean, but according to Van Gundy, they're the best backcourt in NBA history.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't even merit a response.
And I'm 6'4" and have a full head of hair. Right.
All right, on that note, I'm going to do the introduction. On this episode of the AAF Exchange, Trump's policies and inflation, the latest read on the economy, and AI's impact on the election. Joining us to discuss all of this is Douglas Holtz-Eakin and AAF's Director of Technology and Innovation Policy, Jeff Westling. Doug, thanks for joining us.
Always. Great pleasure.
Before we jump into everything, as usual, tell us what's been on your mind.
I'm a little tired of the chatter around the Fed based on the ECB cutting. This morning they cut by a quarter point, and this has been anticipated. And you've been hearing this drumbeat of ECB's cutting. It's time for the Fed to cut. Is the Fed behind schedule? What's wrong with the Fed? And there's a disciplined answer to this question, which is the ECB should cut based on economic conditions in the European Union, and the Fed should cut based on economic conditions in the U.S. And if they happen to coincide, fine, but there's no reason for them to move in lockstep, particularly for a quarter point at this juncture. So, if the ECB was at 1% and the Fed remained at 5%, you'd get some real financial pressures internationally. But we're nowhere near anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, for the U.S., when are we still looking? I mean, we talk about this, I think, on every podcast. Are we still looking at a rate cut this year, or probably maybe after the election?
Today is Thursday. Tomorrow is Jobs Friday.
Yeah.
We're going to get the employment report. If you get a real weak number, then I think that puts a rate cut back on the table.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, we'll talk more about the economy later on.
Yes.
But let's jump into some questions you're regularly getting from reporters at this point.
Yes.
It's basically how candidate Trump's proposed policies that he's been talking about would affect inflation. And so I just wanted to sort of do a rundown of his main policy points and how they might affect inflation. And let's start with the big one, which is tariffs. I mean, this is the one that he's sort of, his 10% proposed tariff. It's sort of, been dominating his trade policy and going after China. Walk us through Trump's plans and your take on the impact.
So the caveat at the outset, I am an economist, so I have to have both hands in here, right? We're going to talk about, on the one hand, which is the fiscal policy hand. What would Trump propose? What would happen? The ultimate impact depends on what the Fed does. Do they try to counter or not? Do they lean real hard to counter inflation pressures, ease when there aren't any? That's the unknown. But having said that, the tariffs are a big supply shock, and they're going to raise prices. And the 10% tariff is a $3 trillion tax over 10 years, and it is comparable in magnitude to the famous Smoot-Hawley tariffs in the Great Depression. So this is not a modest tariff proposal. It's much bigger than, in fact, the 60% tariffs on China, because the base is so much bigger.
Mm-hmm. So but these tariffs, basically what they're doing is they're the tax, but they're also supply chain disruptions and all of that, and that could all.
There are direct impacts. If you're importing a consumer good, the price is going to be higher. If you're importing something that's an input to other production, you're raising the cost of inputs, and that gets passed along the final products.
Okay.
Either way, you end up with upward pressure on prices.
Right. So, all right, next one. Immigration policy, obviously another big one on this campaign. How would the Trump's immigration proposals impact the labor supply? How might it affect inflation?
His dominant proposal is to deport those here illegally. Some of those are working. He would also shut down legal immigration. That is the source of most future population growth in the United States, and after 2040, all future population growth. So you're cutting back on the supply of labor, which is a negative supply shock. Again, reduces the goods and services, raises the prices of the ones that you do produce.
Yeah, I remember back to our podcast with Laura Collins. I think about 8 podcasts ago, and it just really that one really highlighted how important immigration is to our our entire economic system, and you take all that labor out.
Well, it turns out labor is important to our economic system,
right?
And that's the key, the crucial insight.
Yeah,
no way around it. And I wrote this in the dish a while back, and in 2023 we got a huge disinflation break because we had a big influx of immigration that provided a lot of labor supply. Trump would trade an immigration crisis for an inflation crisis. That's a trade he'll make.
Yeah, interesting. All right, next one. What about Trump's take on extending key provisions of the TCJA? How could that play into inflation?
If you just extend it in its entirety, you raise the deficit by about $4.2 trillion over the next 10 years. Big deficits from tax cuts or spending are expansionary and cause inflation. So other things being the same, that's an inflationary move.
Interesting.
Now, they will tell you, just hear the other side, that these are supply-side tax cuts and that they're going to generate increases in capital and labor supply, and we're not going to get inflation pressures. But that's a little hard to buy because they're already there. And so extending them just takes off the table the sunset. I don't think you're going to get a big supply-side impact out of that.
Yeah, I think, and then finally, the last one you've been talking a lot about in regards to Trump and inflation is the regulatory state.
And that's unambiguously good news.
Yeah,
he's
going to turn that off overnight. I mean, you and I have talked at length about the amount of regulations out of this administration and how we're already way past what the Obama administration has done. So how,
absolutely true.
How could this major shift in the regulatory state impact inflation?
Complying with regulations is the cost of doing business. You have to have your prices high enough to cover your cost of doing business. If you take out big regulatory costs, you don't need to have the prices as high. So it takes pressure off inflation. And I didn't believe he could do what he promised to do the first time around. I'm a believer now.
Yeah. You think that 2-to-1 budget is going to come back? That red budget is coming back?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The regulatory budgets were very successful. There's no reason not to return to that.
Yeah. Hopefully, yeah. Well, we'll have to wait and see. You started talking about this at the earlier, the big caveat in all this is the Fed's role in all of this. I mean, so what could future Fed decisions have an impact on all of this?
So imagine you have a big tariff shock, and the Fed's like, no, we are not going to allow the inflation. Let's raise rates and restrict the price increases. Well, that's going to dampen down growth in the economy, and a sitting Trump presidency is going to be infuriated by the Fed hurting growth. Yeah. And so there'll be the need to figure out the right policy, just how much do you counteract, and they'll be dealing with the politics of it. Yeah. Interesting. Well, we'll have to wait and see how that all plays out. Wait and see. Right? We'll have something to talk about if we get there. Yeah, right. We'll pencil that in for next year's podcast at this time. Anyways, before I let you go, let's talk about the economy, one of our favorite topics of late. Last time we discussed, there were some troubling signs in the housing sector, household sector. This week we got new data on manufacturing, a read on the job market. We'll get another read on the job market with tomorrow's May jobs report. We'll learn about consumer credit with the release of that report. What's your take on what we've learned recently, and what do you expect going forward? We're getting mixed data. There's not an unambiguously clear downturn. Neither is there unambiguously clear strength. We got a pretty good ISM services report, so that's kind of reassuring. But UI claims are continuing to creep up. They're not jumping up. We got a weak manufacturing reports. We'll see what happens. The ADP report was, again, somewhat weak, and small business hiring, the NFIB reported their plans are zero over the next 3 months. And so we'll see what the number comes in tomorrow. I think, the consensus is for something in the vicinity of, 180,000. I'm at 135, but I'm a pessimist. Yeah. We'll see. We'll have to see what Fred comes up with in tomorrow's dish. Yes. We also either earlier this week or last week, I can't remember when, we had the JOLTS data where it showed that we're starting to see a tick down in job openings as well. Yeah, the job openings are down to about 8 million. They're back to the level they were in February 2021.
Yeah.
Before we overstimulated the economy dramatically.
I think I read in maybe the Wall Street Journal was like the lowest it's been in 3 years since coming out of the pandemic or something like that. Yeah.
And we now have 1.2 job openings for every unemployed person. You can remember when that was a huge number. You know, I forget what it peaked at, but it was big. So we've seen two kinds of slowing in the labor market. Jobs that were going to be filled now aren't. That's the job openings coming down dramatically. And then an uptick, unemployment is half a point higher than it was a year ago. That's in most circumstances something people notice a lot. We haven't seen it much attention paid to it because it's at such a low level already.
Mm-hmm. And that's part of what the Fed is kind of hoping for with the soft landing, right?
Yeah.
With they would rather just not fill open roles than have to lay off people.
Yeah, Governor Waller's been most vocal about this, saying, look, we don't have to have a big increase in the unemployment rate to be successful, but we do have to take those job openings off the board, and they've done that.
Mm-hmm. So we kind of mentioned this before when we were talking about Trump and inflation, but what does the Fed have to see tomorrow in general to say, okay, we might be able to ease off the pedal a little bit?
So they have to be confident that inflation is coming down.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a really weak labor market number would raise some alarm bells about the economy actually, stopping growing and maybe even going into a recession. Now the Fed has to decide, does the recession cure the inflation or not? If they're confident that's what happens, then they cut. And you cut preemptively before you're in the recession, and that's the recipe for a soft landing. But if they're not convinced that the inflation pressures are wrung out, and remember, inflation expectations are still at 3, and they bumped up to 3.3 the last month. If people are still expecting inflation and pricing inflation into their decisions, even if the economy is softening, the Fed might not ease off yet.
Interesting. When is their next meeting?
They have the June meeting in a week or so, I guess.
In a week or so, so probably in July.
I don't even know what day it is. I don't even know what day it is. So it's next week or the week after. Right?
Today's the 6th for all those wondering.
So 13th would be a Thursday. It's the week after.
And then the minutes come out like
a month later.
A month later. So we'll learn in July what they're kind of where their headspace was in June, and we can talk about it in July, and then start wondering where they'll be in August.
But this is the Fed's problem. I mean, it's every policymaker's problem. Most of the data that you and I discuss is economic history, and we're asking them to deal with the economy as it is right now. So they do things like the Beige Book, which are contemporaneous surveys. They do that right before every meeting. To try to get some read on what's actually going on the ground. They, like everyone else, have access to real-time data that's been now much more prominent. So, but it's hard to piece that together. And, I have some sympathy for the difficulty they face right now, getting a read on the economy.
Sure. All right. That's all I had for you today, except for the trivia question.
Yeah,
so
I was going to sneak out.
Nope. I'm going to give this one to you. This is up your alley. So it's the CBO's latest long-term budget outlook projects that the federal deficit held by the public will rise from 99% of GDP at the end of fiscal year 2024 to 166% of GDP by the end of what year?
2054.
Yep, nailed it. Right on the head.
I thought the question was going to be the 166. I was all pumped.
I saw you. I threw you through a curveball there. I figured you might know the number, so I'm going to give you the year to see if you really were paying attention. But, anyways, all kidding aside, that is an alarming number to say the least.
There's nothing good that can be said about the fiscal outlook, period.
Yeah.
And one wishes that there was some seriousness on Capitol Hill and in the administration about getting it under control.
Or in the election to have a conversation about because I guess the next president doesn't technically have to deal with it, but we're coming to it.
Yeah, I think the next president ought to deal with it.
Yeah. Period. I'm just saying it's 8 years before we have to deal with the mandatory spending, especially, or something like.
It's Social Security's the only trigger. Yeah. You got that, and that's 10 years out. Medicare, that's within the next 10 years as well. So there are going to be sort of events that trigger attention as we go forward, but no one knows when we actually have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. There's a moment when capital markets lose faith in your ability to repay in a timely fashion. We never want them to lose that faith, and we don't know when it would happen.
Yeah. On top of that, we have the argument over the debt ceiling, the debate over the debt ceiling coming back in 2020, early 2025, right?
January 1.
January 1 of 2025.
Yeah.
So the
get
next
ready.
president won't even be sworn either.
Happy New Year.
I think we need to do an emergency podcast on January. January 31st. We can
January 1st.
We can do it live and do a countdown to midnight.
I was thinking about getting up early. You and I could do the podcast at like 6.
No. I either have to be up. I either have to be already awake to do that, or I have to, or it's not happening.
All right,
Doug. Thanks for joining us.
You bet.
Jeff, welcome back.
Thank you.
It's been a while. When was the last time we talked? Actually, it was only a couple of months ago.
Yeah, not too long ago. We were probably talking antitrust.
Yeah, probably. That would be my guess, since that's pretty much what you're talking about these
That or
days.
COSA. Those are
I
the
do
things.
remember this from last time. You got mad because I didn't ask you the trivia question.
Yeah, I felt left out.
I'm going to ask it to you, but it is a budget question, so it's not
I've
your
got no
wheelhouse.
shot.
Yeah, so this is going to be fun for me.
Okay, yeah, we'll see how it goes.
The CBO, here's the trivia question. The CBO's latest long-term budget outlook projects that the federal debt held by the public will rise from 99% of GDP at the end of fiscal year 2024 to 166% of GDP by the end of what year?
Oh boy, I've got no shot. I'm going to guess 2035.
A little further out, 2054.
Yeah, I wasn't even close.
Yeah, you were 2 decades off.
Yeah, I think Doug's gonna fire me for that one.
Yeah, maybe. He doesn't. The good thing is he probably won't listen to your half.
Oh, break my heart.
Hey, I warned you that the trivia questions were a little.
I thought they were gonna be like Boston sports.
No.
Much better chance of that.
Well, we did talk about Doug is wearing a green tie today, so
Everything's lining up. For the
I'm not
podcast
saying
listeners, we're recording this on Thursday, so
Yeah, it's game one.
Game 1 of Boston and Dallas tonight.
Exactly. I did call him out for that, so we're already good there. All right, should we talk about what you actually came here to talk about?
Probably should.
Yeah. All right, there's limitless speculation about how AI might impact jobs in the economy. You know, I think our number one paper for our number one product on our website for the last couple of months at this point has been our AI legislation tracker. People just want to know what's going on here. More recently, people are raising concerns about how AI might impact the elections that's coming up. And the Biden administration is starting to move forward with regulation for AI in broadcast media. What's going on?
Yeah, so what's going on is that the FCC is circulating an NPRM that would essentially ban, or not even ban, but just require disclosures anytime a campaign or issue ad uses AI to generate part of that image. And what the FCC means by that isn't exactly clear, and that's one of the issues that we're having a lot with these AI discussions, is that AI is, a really broad term, and it's kind of becoming one of those terms that people just throw out there to have an impact without actually knowing what they're talking about. So it's going to be interesting because it's going to require for broadcast television and not necessarily for other media these disclosures and basically saying to the consumer or the person watching the broadcast that this ad has some kind of AI image generation in it. And it's out of a fear that there's going to be some kind of deep fake or false image that's pushing a fake narrative. But it's not entirely clear how this would work.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you said that people have a broad definition of AI because there's all these subcategories in it. It's one of the nice things that the legislation tracker sort of does is walks you through the different little subcategories of what they mean by AI. Let's break down in a little bit more detail. If the FCC, actually, before we go there, you said just for broadcast. So is there some sort of an authority missing for digital?
So basically, it's a couple things. Number one, the FCC is only acting with what power Congress has given them, and they do have some authority in cable television, but not as much as broadcast. the bigger issue is the First Amendment. And I don't want to, we don't have a huge block, so I can't spend a ton of time here, but essentially there's less First Amendment scrutiny for broadcast because everything's over the air and there's a limited number of licenses. And the scarcity of those licenses gives the FCC a little more ability to go after content that otherwise they couldn't regulate. You don't have those same concerns online. There's no limit to who can speak online. That's one of the benefits of it. So the jurisdiction is kind of weird, and that actually is going to cause some issues with this, and I'm sure we can get into it a little bit more. But if consumers are getting disclosures on broadcast but not the digital, would they think the digital is real because they don't see those disclosures?
Right.
That's the kind of thing we need to worry about here.
Interesting. Well, maybe a topic for a longer day. So let's break down a little bit more in detail. If the FCC approves a rule requiring disclosures for the AI ads, what does this mean in practice?
Yeah, in practice, so that's what we're kind of trying to figure out. I think what it would look like is that they're going to try to define AI in a pretty narrow way. So it'll probably be some kind of deep learning generative model. You could think of like your Geminis, your Meta.ai, where you type in, generate me an image of whatever. And if you use that in a campaign ad, you will probably have a little disclosure at the bottom saying AI was used to generate an image in this video. The concern is if they don't define it narrowly. A lot of our tools right now for just digitally editing things are AI. And does that mean everything has to have an AI tag on it now? And if everything has an AI tag, does nothing have an AI tag? And what impact are we actually going to have? And at the same time, knowing that there's a fake image in here or AI was used to help generate the ad, how is that actually stopping misinformation? And something I've been harping on for a long time is that you don't need AI to spread misinformation. And if campaigns want to lie about an issue, they've been doing that for a long time.
I was gonna say that's happened before.
Yeah.
That's nothing new, unfortunately. Right? Like we don't want misinformation out there, but it has happened. So when you're talking about a disclaimer here, we're talking about at the end of an ad it said this candidate has paid for this ad.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
I would assume it's something like that, but again, we don't even know what's really in the NPRM. Normally, what the FCC does, and this is something that's a little odd here, is that they vote at an open meeting. And ever since the Pi FCC, which was one of Trump's FCC chair, they've been releasing those NPRMs before the vote. You get about a month to look and read through it.
The public
not even warning them, but just getting input, letting people say these are the things you should consider as you're doing the NPRM. These are as the proceeding goes on to a final order. These are, obviously there'll still be comment here, but it's weird that they've done this a little bit behind closed doors and they're not really letting the public speak to the NPRM phase. And we'll be able to speak after they adopt the NPRM and before they adopt an order, but it's just an odd choice that they've made here.
Yes, so it seems like the biggest problem with this is going to be how they define it, and so the impact on campaigns is going to be hard to tell.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, and I don't know how much campaigns are even using generative AI right now as it is. So that's again back to the definition question, because I think if I'm a campaign and I'm using normal digital editing tools, I might not realize that some of these tools are throwing me into this category. So at first it's like, oh, this isn't a big deal. I'm not using ChatGPT to make my campaign ads, but you still might be using a digital editing tool that's using algorithms to help brighten the image. That could be an AI generated image.
I mean, as a guy that works in the digital space, I can tell you, I don't always realize when I'm in Adobe and I say just, eliminate this in the background or just, hit the auto button on these short videos that we put out and just say auto fix the lighting and the saturation and the hue of everything. So it's sometimes it's just it's just happening. So it'll be interesting to see how they define all that. All right, so process-wise, let's say the FCC approves the rule making. What happens next? Will this go into effect right away?
Yeah, so this is a great question. It will not go into effect right away. Even though, like I said, that some of this is behind the closed doors, what they're voting on is a notice of proposed rulemaking. So that means they'll put out, here's what we are proposing to do. Public will have, I think, 30 days or 60 days to comment and a little bit more time to do reply comments. So if you're interested in working on this, or if you're interested in letting the FCC know, keep an eye out. if they adopt this, there'll be a period where the public can go in and say, hey, this is a concern we have, this is something we don't have. Then they'll eventually vote on a final order, and that's when it'll start going into effect.
Interesting.
I'd assume it happened pretty quickly. They probably want to, if they do want to do this, they'll probably need to get this done quick so it can
I would
be done
imagine
before the
by
election.
July or August when the campaigns really start buying up those TV
They are
times.
limited, though, by the APA process, essentially the Administrative Procedure Act processes. So they do have specific time frames they need to adhere to that make it take longer. So.
Interesting. Well, that'll be an interesting thing to see play out and for this election, which we've already started seeing campaign ads for, and I'm sure some people it's gonna pick up more and more as we get closer to November.
Yeah, definitely.
So, final question for you: who you got?
I've bet against Dallas every series so far. I'm still picking Boston. They are the better team. You gotta pick them, but I'm consistently wrong.
Yeah, I don't like that prediction. So could you try again?
Can both teams lose?
No, we
That's too bad.
But you know who I already picked with my Celtics green on today. All right, Jeff. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.